He was no soldier, no politician, no hero. But as the world was plunged into Nazi terror, Nicholas Winton, a young stockbroker, made a decision that would change the lives of thousands of children, and he never told a soul. In this moving documentary, based on real events, you will learn the forgotten story of a man who saved 2,500 children from the Holocaust, facing bureaucracy, threats, and a silence that lasted half a century. A story of courage, secrets, reunions, and a map that can change everything. If you believe that one person can change the destiny of many, this story will leave a deep impression on you. Get ready to be moved from beginning to end. The ending will leave you speechless. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive other real stories that should never be forgotten. My name is Nicholas, and for decades, no one knew what I had done. No headlines, no awards, no thanks, not even a why. Maybe because I never told anyone, maybe because deep down I never thought what I did was extraordinary. But there was a time when the world was going dark, and I had to choose, turn away or open the door. It was December 1938. I was 29 years old and working as a stockbroker in London. My days were spent among reports, telegrams, and meetings that smelled of smoke and greed. But something was bothering me. The newspapers were talking about the Munich agreements, Germany taking over Czechoslovakia, and one word was starting to appear more than ever: camps, concentration camps. Then the phone call came. Martin Blake, a friend of mine, was working in Prague with refugees. His voice was shaking on the other end of the line. "Nick, we need you here, now." I took a vacation from work. I caught the first train, and when I arrived in Prague, my world turned upside down. Hundreds of children. Some were cold, some were hungry, some had no shoes, all of them had no parents. They were being herded into warehouses, makeshift shelters, and abandoned buildings. The Jewish families were desperate. Since the German invasion, time seemed to be running backwards, and too quickly. The Gestapo was already roaming the streets. The borders were about to close. I looked at those children, and I thought, if they were my brothers, my nephews, what would I do? It was that night, lying in a damp, dark room, that I made the decision that would change my life, and more importantly, it would change the lives of thousands of others. I was going to get those kids out of there. But it wasn't that simple. The European embassies refused visas. The bureaucracy was a maze. No one wanted to get involved. I went to the British consulate. They said that without a sponsor for each child, and without a guarantee of return at the end of the war, nothing would be done. I went back to the hotel. I sat down, I got a pen and paper, and I started, name by name, child by child, file by file. I set up a makeshift office in the hotel lobby. I used the manager's typewriter. I organized a network of volunteers. I recruited British families willing to take in children. I went door to door. I called phone after phone. I convinced strangers to adopt strangers. Every yes was a life saved. And meanwhile, the trains continued to fill up. The German SS were already surrounding Prague station. Time was running out. The first train left in March 1939 with 20 children. It was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the number grew: 50, 100, 500. I sent telegrams to London, filled out forms by hand, forged a few stamps when necessary. Yes, I forged, not out of vanity, but because between obeying a rule or saving a child, the choice was easy. But no one could know, not even my wife. Years later, she would find an old leather briefcase in our attic. Inside were names, photos, boarding lists, letters from mothers saying, "Take care of my son." She was silent and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I just replied, "Because it wasn't about me." For decades, I never spoke publicly. The children grew up, became adults, and spread out across the world. Many of them didn't even know who I was. Then one day in 1988, I received an invitation, a television show. They said it would be about ordinary people with extraordinary stories. I went. I sat in the audience. The presenter read my name, my story, and asked, "Nicholas, you are sitting next to someone special. Do you know who it is?" I looked around, and then she stood up, a middle-aged woman, brown hair, tearful eyes. "I'm one of the children you saved." The studio fell silent. Then another person stood up, and another, and another. 2 whole rows. They had all been saved by that man who had kept silent for 50 years. The camera caught me putting my hand to my face. I cried, and everyone cried with me. But that night, as I was driving home, I looked out the taxi window and thought, what about that last train? The one that never left? The one with 250 children that I couldn't get out in time? They were not so lucky. And that's why today, finally, I tell this story. Not for glory, not for pride, but because the world needs to remember. Evil only wins when good people remain silent. But what happened to that last train? To the names that were stuck on the papers and never reached their destination? There is something that to this day I cannot forget. The faces of every child on that last train are etched into my mind like a fire that never goes out. I remember a little girl with red hair who was holding a stuffed bear with one of its arms sewn shut. I remember a boy who asked me if London smelled like fresh bread as his mother's bakery did. I remember the suppressed tears, the huge eyes fixed on the carriage door, waiting for the time to leave. But that train never left. It was September 1st, 1939, the day Germany invaded Poland. The same day World War II officially began. The borders were closed like traps. The tracks were closed. The soldiers took over the stations, and the 250 children who had their bags packed disappeared. No one ever heard from them again. I tried everything. I sent letters. I asked the Red Cross for help. I knocked on politicians' doors. Nothing. The war swallowed everything up, and no matter how many children I saved before, the weight of that train never left my shoulders. I went back to London. I tried to get on with my life. I got married, had kids, worked hard. But every night when I laid my head on the pillow, it was as if the faces came back one by one, begging me not to forget them. I didn't forget. The folder where I kept everything, the documents, the lists, the pictures, stayed there in the attic. No one knew, not my wife, not my children, and I never thought anyone would find out. Until that day. It was an ordinary Sunday. Greta, my wife, was going upstairs to put away Christmas boxes. And there it was, the leather briefcase, dusty, with worn edges but intact. She came down the stairs with the briefcase in her hands, her eyes confused, almost incredulous. "What is it, Nicholas?" I sat down. I opened the folder slowly, and I told him everything. She listened in silence. And when I finished, there were tears in her eyes, not of pain, but of something between awe and reverence. She didn't hug me. She just put her hand over mine and said, "The world needs to know." I hesitated, but she was right. It was she who sought out a journalist called Elizabeth Maxwell, who specialized in Holocaust histories. It was she who insisted that the documents be made public. And that was how my name, after 50 years of hiding, came to the BBC. They made a point of not telling me anything. The show would be a surprise, they said. When I sat in the audience, I thought it was just another one of those quick interview segments. But then, they started reading the letters, the cards, the names. And when I heard the phrase, "One of the children you saved is here," I felt my breath catch. I recognized her. Even after all this time, the same eyes, the same way of tilting her head. She smiled and said, "I am alive because of you." When I looked back, the entire row stood up. Men, women, children, and grandchildren. I was surrounded by generations of lives that only existed because one day I decided not to look the other way. At that moment, I realized something that had never occurred to me. I had not saved 669 children. I had saved entire lineages. After the program, the world finally discovered the story. I was invited to give lectures. I received awards. I was even decorated by the Queen. But I confess that none of this touched me as much as a letter I received months later, handwritten by a 14-year-old boy from Australia. He said, "Dear Sir Winton, my grandmother was one of the children you saved, and because of that, I exist. When I grow up, I want to be someone who saves lives too. Thank you for giving meaning to my name." I read that and cried like I had never cried before, because I finally understood that sometimes the good we do without witnesses is what resonates the most. But one day, many years later, I was invited to visit Prague again. Almost 70 years had passed. The stations were modern, the streets had a different smell. But when I entered the old shelter where I had registered those children for the first time, something stopped me. There she was, the same rag doll as the red-haired girl, in a corner, hanging by a thread, as if it had been waiting for me. And next to it, a cardboard box, with something that would make me stop breathing for a few seconds. Inside the box, there was a list, and on that list, there were names. Many names, and among them a name that made me freeze. The name of the red-haired girl. She wasn't on the last train. She survived, but it never reached London. Her name was Clara Weiss. I have never forgotten it. She was 7 years old at the time, with amber eyes and a small mole on the right side of her neck. Her mother begged me in tears to put her on the April train, but her visa arrived too late. Clara was put on the list for the September train, the last one. When that train was cancelled, I assumed the worst. All the children were taken by the authorities. None of them were ever heard from again. But now, standing in front of that forgotten box 70 years later, I found not only Clara's name, but also a note next to it, written in blue ink, blurred by time. Trebiz Farm, 14/19/1939. Trebiz. The word hammered in my mind like a key, slowly turning in a rusty lock. A farm, in the Bohemian countryside. How did it get there? And who took it? I returned to London with the note in my pocket, folded as carefully as if it were a reliquary. Over the next few days, I began to investigate quietly. I sent letters. I consulted historical archives. I used my last contacts with old colleagues from the Red Cross. And with each reply I received, a new piece of the puzzle emerged. Clara was not sent to Auschwitz, nor was Theresienstadt. According to a report from 1943, there was an underground network of peasants in rural Bohemia who sheltered Jewish children who were hiding from the Nazis. Many of these protectors were killed, but others simply disappeared with the children covering their tracks. That's how I discovered a woman's name, Hanna Valkova. In her early 20s, Hanna was a teacher who became a caretaker for abandoned children in rural areas. According to records, she took in at least a dozen girls between 1939 and 1942. The last name on her list, Clara Weiss. My heart raced. I was almost 100 years old. I could barely walk without help. But something inside me said, I needed to see her face again. Not just to know if she survived, but because of all the children I had ever held, Clara was the one who stayed with me. The only one who looked me in the eye and whispered, "Promise me I'll see Mommy again." I promised, and I broke my promise. Or at least, I thought it had broken. A Czech journalist, a friend of one of my grandchildren, offered to go to Trebiz, a nearly forgotten village with just over 300 people. He took Clara's photo, the only one left at the bottom of his leather briefcase. He showed it from door to door. Most of them couldn't tell. But then a man in a straw hat looked closely and said, "I knew a woman with those eyes. She lived on the hill. They called her The lady of the orchard. The orchard, the trees, and the high walls. The reporter climbed the hill, and there, among the twisted apple trees, a solitary house stood the test of time. He knocked on the door. The person who answered was a woman with completely white hair, wrinkled skin, but a gaze that cut through time. He held out the photo. She looked at it, and tears began to fall silently. That was me. Clara was alive. She lived alone, never married, and never left the village. When the war ended, she discovered that her parents had been killed in Buchenwald. She then decided never to leave the place where she had been saved. This is where they gave me shelter. This is where I was reborn. I asked her to come to London, but she refused. She said her steps belonged to that land, so I wrote her a letter, long, sincere, telling her everything I never had the courage to say. I told her I tried. I told her I cried, and I apologized. She replied 2 months later, in a firm handwriting and with a dried flower inside the envelope. Dear Mr. Nicholas, I knew you would come back for me, even if it was after so long. I read it dozens of times. It was like forgiveness, like a seal that finally closed an old wound. But there was one last page, a yellowed piece of paper with a note that she herself had kept for decades, the name of another girl who had been taken with her to the farm but separated at the end of 1940. She never found out what happened to that child. And in that role, another familiar name emerged, Anna Goldstein. I remembered. She was also on the list for the last train, but that name was underlined twice. And unlike Clara, there were no medical or evacuation records recorded after September 1939. It was as if she had disappeared from the map, but someone underlined it. Why? Anna Goldstein. The name echoed in the papers, but not in the memories. She was too young, probably only 4 years old in 1939. She hardly spoke, according to reports. Her file in my folder was one of the sparsest. A name, an estimated age, and a slightly blurred photo. No address, no next of kin. Just a red stamp, last train. And now that name appeared again, handwritten twice, by Clara herself. Why had she kept it for decades? What secret was there? I tried to trace Anna through official records, but I found nothing, as if she had been swallowed up by time. No deaths, no survival, no immigration. A blank space. I went back to Clara's letter. I read it line by line, and I found a forgotten sentence at the bottom. Anna didn't talk much, but she drew pictures. She always drew a star with 6 points and a sun behind it. The image stuck in my mind. The Star of David. A sun. Something symbolic, perhaps. A few days later, I was surprised by a call from the Czech journalist. He had returned to the village of Trebiš to investigate the parish records, even though he knew that as a Jew, Anna would probably not be listed in Catholic documents. But on a stained page of an old notebook, he found a curious note written by a local nun who had cared for orphaned children during the war. God sent 2 girls to us, Clara and the little one, the one who couldn't talk. Her name is Anna, according to the other one. The little one draws stars all day long. The nun had noted this in 1940, but after that, no further mention, except for a note on the back of the same page. Minor taken by strange man on Christmas, didn't return. The ink on this sentence seemed shaky, almost uncertain. Who was this strange man? And why didn't anyone do anything? I began to connect the dots. Rural Bohemia in the 1940s was rife with informers, soldiers, and profiteers. Many pretended to help, but were selling children into trafficking or using them as labor. Was it possible that Anna had been kidnapped? I contacted a local historian who specialized in the post-war missing. He listened to my story and responded with something that gave me goosebumps. In 1941, there were reports of a mute girl being seen wandering alone in the town of Most, about 50 miles away. She wore boyish clothes and carried a sketchbook. She was said to be the daughter of travelers. but no one has ever been able to discover her name. And then he sent me a photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed a child standing in front of a destroyed bakery. His hair was disheveled. His face was covered in soot, and in his hand, an open notebook. On the notebook, visible even in the low resolution, was a drawing of a star, and behind it, what looked like a sun. My heart stopped. It was her. It was Anna. I printed the image. I looked at it for hours. I brought my face close to the page as if I could touch the past with my fingers. That girl survived something that not even time wanted to keep. But where did she go after that? That's when a parallel story began to emerge. I discovered that between 1946 and 1948, a Vienna orphanage had taken in a number of stateless children from Eastern Europe. Many had no documents, no names, no roots. A social worker had registered an unusual case. An 8-year-old girl who refused to speak but communicated through drawings. Always the same: a star, a sun, a house with a triangular roof. She was registered as Anya. No last name. Most intriguingly, the social worker wrote in her diary that the girl seemed to recognize the name Clara. When she heard it, she pressed her hands to her chest and smiled. I requested access to the orphanage's files. After weeks of waiting, I was able to obtain a partial copy of Anya's file. In the field of observations, has clear Semitic traits, very affectionate, but with episodes of dissociation, shows signs of extreme trauma. In the destination field, she was adopted in 1950 by an Austrian-American couple and taken to the United States. And attached, a photo. It was her, older, about 10 years old, but her eyes, the same lost look, yet full of light. Anna, or Anya, was alive, and maybe still was. The adoption form contained only one verifiable piece of information: the name of the adopting couple, Miriam and Samuel Rothman, Long Island, New York. I took a deep breath. My fingers were shaking, because right there in that moment, I realized there was a real chance. A window open, even if it was small. What if I found Anna? What if she was still alive? But there was a problem. Someone seemed to want to prevent this story from coming to light. The first concrete clue was before me. Miriam and Samuel Rothman, Long Island, New York. That was where my search needed to lead. But what seemed like a simple record check turned into something more dense. My grandson, David, a young lawyer with a passion for genealogy, offered to help. He accessed public records, obituaries, immigration records, historical databases, and what he found in the first few days was promising. Miriam and Samuel had died in the 1990s, but they left behind 2 children. One of them, according to voter and property records, still lived in the family home, a gray townhouse in Oyster Bay, a few kilometers from the coast. David tried to contact him by phone, but the call was rejected. He sent a registered letter, no response. He went there himself, and when he came back, something in his face seemed out of place. "Grandpa." He opened the door. I said his name. I said we wanted to know about Anna, that maybe she was adopted by his parents. But he turned pale. He was shaking, and he only said one thing: "You don't know what you're doing." Like this. He closed the door, locked it. I heard him crying on the other side. It consumed me inside. What did that reaction mean? What kind of truth was buried there? And even more, was Anna alive or dead? David persisted. He returned a few days later with a bouquet and a handwritten letter from me. This time, the man, named Richard Rothman, opened the door with a blank stare and slumped shoulders. He took the letter, thanked me silently, and closed the door again. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at my house with no return address. Inside was a letter written in faded blue ink. The handwriting was strong but uneven. It began with a sentence that stopped me in my tracks. "My name is Anna. My name has always been Anna, and I remember you." My chest exploded. It was her. 20 lines on old paper told me that she had grown up in the United States, struggling with fragmented memories, recurring nightmares, and deep silences. That at 16, she had tried to take her own life. That she had been to hospitals, psychologists, and retreats. That it was only at 40, after losing her adoptive parents, that she began to draw again. And as she drew, she remembered the star, the sun, a hand holding hers in a station full of smoke. This man held my hand. I saw security in his eyes. I never knew his name, but I knew he had pulled me out of the darkness. And then came the last line of the letter. "You were the only truth I took with me." My eyes closed in the urge to protect it. I kept the letter as if it were a piece of time itself. But soon after, the threats came. David received an email from an anonymous source. Its content was brief. "Stop digging or we'll bury you together." Cold, direct, no digital signature. A second email said, "Some stories are buried for a reason." We reported it to the authorities. They said it was untraceable, that it might just be a bad joke. But I knew someone was upset. But why? Who would have something to hide about a Jewish girl saved from war? It was then that everything made sense, a piece that had been there since the beginning, and that I only realized now. The underlined name. Anna was the only one whose name was marked twice, and that was no coincidence. Someone had marked her. Someone had singled her out, but not to save her, to track her. I reopened all the files in the folder. A small envelope, never opened, caught my eye. In the corner was the stamp of the German embassy in Prague, dated August 1939. Inside was an anonymous note in German. Translated, it read, "The minor Goldstein has a direct connection. Be careful. High interest. Do not board without authorization." Direct links. High interest. It was as if Anna had a value beyond her life. And it was Clara who protected her. And it was me who almost gave her away. I reread the embassy note dozens of times. Direct call, high interest. It wasn't casual language. It was language of surveillance, of control, of covert operations. What could a 4-year-old girl possibly be carrying that would attract that kind of attention? I went back to the registration forms, to the list of names. There was one detail I had never noticed before, perhaps for lack of context. In the corner of Anna Goldstein's form, where normally just her mother's name would be, there was a scribble in graphite pencil. Goldstein Lehmann, a double surname, almost erased, almost hidden. I researched the historical archives of the Jewish community in Vienna, and then everything became clear. The name Lehmann was associated with one of the most influential bankers in Austria before the Nazi annexation, Heinrich Lehmann. He had a considerable fortune, several properties, and, according to secret financial documents, discreetly financed escape routes for Jews through Switzerland. He had mysteriously disappeared in 1938. No body was found. No trial. Nothing. And then it occurred to me, what if Anna wasn't just a refugee? What if she was the heir to something? To a secret, to an account, to documents that never reached their destination? I went back to Anna's letter. In one of the passages she said, "For years I have had the same dream. I am sitting in a room with large chandeliers. My father calls me over. He hands me a small wooden box. He says, 'You must keep this for all of us. One day they will come for it.' Was it just a dream? Or was it a memory?" The name Lehmann explained why her name had been underlined, why Clara had been taken off the original route, why Anna had been taken separately on Christmas 1940. Someone knew who she was. Someone had tried to stop her from reaching London, and someone failed. But the years passed, and perhaps whatever was hidden in that wooden box was lost. Or not. The following week, David traveled to the United States with one goal in mind: to find Anna. He had her address and her permission. Pale blue wooden house in upstate New York. David described her as delicate as porcelain, but with eyes that burned like candles in an ancient temple. She was waiting for him, sitting on a park bench, with a plaid blanket draped over her knees and her hair tied back in a simple bun. When she saw the photo he was carrying of me from 1939, holding a child's hand as we boarded the plane, she smiled, she cried, and she said, "I finally know I didn't dream." The two talked for hours. She showed him her old notebooks, her drawings of stars and suns. She said that for a long time she thought she was crazy, but now she understood that her childhood was not an invention. It was an echo of the truth. At the end of the day, she took David up to the attic. She showed him an old box wrapped in linen. She said she had never been able to open it, but that she felt it wasn't for her to do it alone. David returned with the box. He brought it to my house as if he were delivering a sacred relic. I held it in both hands, feeling its weight more symbolic than real. I opened the lid. Inside, there were only three things. 1, a small gold star with the name Anna engraved on the back, in Yiddish. 2, a stained piece of cloth, like from a torn uniform. 3, a sealed envelope with red wax, stamped with the Lehman family crest. And on the back of the envelope, a handwritten inscription: "Only open when it is safe to do so, remember." My hands shook. Was it safe to remember now? I broke the seal. I took out the contents. A letter on aged paper and a single folded sheet with a signature that made the ground disappear beneath my feet. It was Heinrich Lehmann's. It said, "If this letter has reached you, it is because my greatest fear has been confirmed. I did not survive, but my daughter did. Inside this envelope is the key to proving who she is, and perhaps who we were. Protect her." Attached to the letter was a copy of a birth certificate with diplomatic seal, dated Vienna 1935. Anna Goldstein Lehmann, legal heiress to a lost fortune, living witness to a financial empire and a silent persecution. But next to the certificate, there was also another piece of paper, one that made no sense at first glance. It looked like a map with marks, coordinates, symbols. David looked at me and said, "This isn't just history, this is treasure, and someone still wants it hidden." I held the map in both hands as if it were made of glass. The texture of the old paper, the pen and ink calligraphy, the hand marks and coordinates in encrypted German. This was no ordinary map. It was a puzzle, a route. We took the document to a historian who specialized in World War II artifacts. He studied it for hours, muttering dates and comparing features. When he was finished, he looked up slowly and said, "I'm sorry. This could lead to what's left of the Lehman family's hidden wealth. Accounts, documents, maybe even gold bars. The Nazis confiscated it, but a lot of it disappeared. If this is true, someone hid it all before it was taken, and the key was the child himself. Anna was more than a survivor. She was a living vault." We delivered a digital copy to the Austrian consulate. Less than 48 hours later, I received a call from Vienna. A man with a tense voice introduced himself as a spokesman for the National Archives and asked us to meet urgently. The message was not an invitation. It was a summons. David traveled with me. We were welcomed into an old building with gray walls and narrow hallways. The director led us to a private room where 4 folders were placed on the table, and then he said, "Mr. Winton, Mr. Rothman, you must understand that the name Lehmann has not disappeared. It has been erased, deliberately, because he knew too much, because he helped Jews, and because he hid things that the Reich was never able to recover." We opened the folders. One contained copies of Gestapo telegrams with Anna's name highlighted. They were accompanied by direct orders. Do not allow the minor to leave under any circumstances. Priority level 1. The second folder contained aerial photographs of a property on the outskirts of Linz, the area indicated on the map. The third folder made me hold my breath. Photos of bodies, adults, with the name Lehmann between the labels, and a note. Witnesses eliminated. Object not located. The object. It was Anna. In the last folder were more recent documents, a classified dossier on post-war operations by the CIA and Stasi. It seemed impossible, but Anna had been monitored by both sides of the Cold War. Why? Because she was the missing piece in a decades-old plot. The link that connected Swiss banks, lost inheritances, and unsolved war crimes. The archive director looked at us gravely. There are people who would rather this story remain buried. But now, it's too late. The world needs to know. We were escorted out. On the street, David was white as a sheet. We walked in silence to the hotel. When I arrived, I found an envelope taped to the door of the room. No name, no sender. Inside, a single photograph. It was mine, dated 1939. Me, with Clara on the left, Anna on the right, holding hands in front of the train. But the difference is that in this photo, a man was in the background, wearing a black overcoat, his hat tilted, his face partially covered. And behind the image, a handwritten sentence, "Silence has protected you until now. Break it, and you will pay the price." It was a threat, direct, cold, as if no time had passed. I returned to London shaken but determined. I wasn't going to stop. Not now. The following week, we organized a public exhibition. I invited journalists, survivors, historians. Anna agreed to show up quietly. It was time to tell everything, to open the archives, to show the photos, the names, the maps, and to reveal the truth that had been buried for generations. The night before the event, I received an anonymous phone call. A distorted metallic voice said, "You saved 2,500. Do you really want to put everyone at risk now?" I hung up and looked out the window of my house. On the sidewalk, there was a car parked for hours, engine off, headlights off, motionless, watching. The truth had a price, and now the past wanted to charge him. The night before the unveiling was the longest of my life. I, a man of almost 105 years, sat at the dining room table, looking at the menacing photograph with the eyes of someone who has seen everything except complete justice. The car was still there. It wasn't moving, but its silence screamed. David wanted to cancel the exhibition. "Grandpa, if something happens to you, I won't forgive myself," I replied without hesitation. "If I don't go tomorrow, they win. Not for me, but for her, for Clara, for Anna, for all the voices that were never heard." The next morning, I dressed as carefully as I had dressed in 1939. I put on the pocket watch my mother had given me before leaving for Prague. In the museum hall, a crowd was waiting. Journalists, filmmakers, survivors, and silently among them she, Anna, white-haired but with a firm posture. His eyes were not filled with fear, but with memory. The strength that only someone who had carried the burden of silence for 8 decades could exude. I went up on stage, supported by David. The room fell silent. I grabbed the microphone. For a moment, words escaped me. Then I took the little gold star from my pocket, the one that had been in Anna's box, and held it up in the air. This star was given to a girl who should never have survived. But she survived, and with her, the truth survived. Timid applause rose. I continued. "For 50 years I have kept silent, out of fear, out of prudence, out of shame for having missed the last train. But now I understand, silence is the worst form of surrender, and I am no longer willing to surrender." I revealed the documents, the names, the connections to the Lehmann family, the trail left to New York, the map, and finally, the threatening photo. I showed the man in the hat. I asked the audience, who was he? An officer? An informant? A lookout? I don't know. But he was there. And someone took this picture to remind me that I was being watched. Even now, even at this very moment. The tension in the room was palpable. Eyes met. A camera click broke the silence. And then, she stood up. Anna. He walked up to me. He hugged me, tightly. We cried together. And when he walked away, he said with a trembling but firm voice, "They wanted to erase my life, but you wrote my name back into history." People stood up. Applause filled the space. A spontaneous chorus of recognition, but in the back of the audience, something caught my attention. The man in the car. He was there, dark jacket, sunglasses, but this time, he didn't hide. He just stared at me. And then, he left discreetly through the side door. He knew, I knew it was too late. The truth had been released. In the days that followed, headlines spread around the world. The girl with the map. The last train. Winton's secret. Museums requested documents. The UN honored Anna with a posthumous medal in the name of the forgotten children of war. And more than 80 families discovered through our list that they are descendants of a child saved by me. But for me, nothing surpassed the last gift. Weeks before my death, I received a box. No sender. Inside, a hand-painted portrait. Me, sitting on a bench at the Prague station, with 2 children next to me. Clara, Anna, and in the background, a train leaving. On the back of the painting, just one sentence. "You didn't save 2,500, you saved their world." I closed my eyes, and I felt for the first time in 80 years, peace. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to know this truth. Leave a comment. Did you already know Nicholas Winton? End.